Good morning, everyone. Good to see you, Jen. And welcome to another episode of BBN. So this morning we will be studying the second part of the Bhaya Sutta. The link is at the top of the live chat. So even though the sutta study today said a different name of the sutta, since we hadn't finished this sutta last Friday, we're going to do this one instead, and we'll postpone the other sutta that was we're supposed to study today to another day. All right, good to see you, Kyle and Demi, Andy, Sally, Kita, and Cam. Good morning to all of you. Good to see you in this rainy day here in New York. Anyway, it's pretty rainy. Great time for staying inside, both physically and metaphorically. All right, so without further ado, good morning, Bante Sudazo. Thank you for teaching us once again. And I'll pass it on to you.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. So we'll continue with the Bhaya Sutta, so Majjhima Nikaya number 4. We had left off with the section on skepticism. So moving on to the next section. The Buddha says, Brahman, it occurred to me, when contemplatives or Brahmins who praise themselves and disparage others go to dwell in remote wilderness or forest areas, because of that flaw, self-praising and disparaging others, those honorable contemplatives and Brahmins bring upon themselves unwholesome fear and terror. But when I go to dwell in remote wilderness or forest areas, I do not praise myself or disparage others. I am one who does not praise oneself or disparage others. Of the noble ones who do not praise themselves or disparage others when they go to dwell in remote wilderness or forest areas, I am one of them. Brahmin, seeing that I do not praise myself or disparage others, I became more confident about living in the wilderness. So this section here, so not praising oneself or disparaging others. This is sometimes translated as praising oneself at the expense of others, but that's not quite what it says. It says praising oneself and putting others down. So it's talking about that tendency that we sometimes have to try to elevate ourselves above others by talking up our good qualities and our good traits while pointing out the bad qualities and shortcomings of other people. So it's coming from that place of conceit, that place of self-superiority, the place of wanting to lord it over other people or to increase our status in relationship to other people. So this is, of course, not proper. It's not proper to try to elevate ourselves above others. By overemphasizing our good traits and overemphasizing the other person's negative traits. That said, it is important to be aware of our good traits. So the Buddha speaks in many, many places. He speaks about the importance of recollecting one's own goodness, recollecting one's own generosity. So being clearly aware of one's own good qualities. But being clearly aware of your own good qualities doesn't mean going around bragging about them or constantly praising yourself in order to elevate you above others. It just means a recognition of what's wholesome and what's unwholesome, and a clear recognition of your own wholesome qualities. Similarly, disparaging others. So of course we should be aware of what's wholesome and what's unwholesome. So when we recognize that somebody else is doing something unwholesome, then we should be aware of it. But that doesn't mean that we need to condemn or insult that person or try to put them down. It might mean that when the time and place is right, we might gently point out to them what their flaw is and how they can improve. And when we talk about the Chodana Sutta in a few days, then I'll go over some of the practical advice in the suttas on how to do that properly. But that's not the same as putting someone down. That's actually trying to help someone, trying to lift them up. Whereas disparaging others, it's about lowering them so that you look better by comparison. That's what this is talking about. In fact, instead, what we should be doing is looking for other people's good qualities. There's a lovely discourse where the Buddha says that even if you meet someone who has many bad qualities and very few good qualities, still you should focus on their good qualities. And the simile he gives for this is like someone who's dying of thirst, who's stumbling along a dusty road, and they come across a little tiny puddle of water on the road. So even though it's just a little tiny bit of water, still they get down on the ground and they slurp up that little bit of water. So he says in the same way, even if somebody has many, many bad qualities and very few good qualities, we should still focus on their good qualities. So I'll try to find that sutta, and maybe we'll talk about it in sutta study one of these days. So the next section, the Buddha says, Brahman, it occurred to me when contemplatives or Brahmins who are timid and cowardly go to dwell in remote wilderness or forest areas because of that flaw, timidity and cowardice, those honorable contemplatives and Brahmins bring upon themselves unwholesome fear and terror. But when I go to dwell in remote wilderness or forest areas, I am not timid or cowardly. I am free of apprehension. Of the noble ones who are free of apprehension when they go to dwell in remote wilderness or forest areas, I am one of them. Brahman, seeing the absence of apprehension in me, I became more confident about living in the wilderness. So, it's important to have courage in our spiritual practice, and especially if you're planning to live in solitude in the wilderness, of course, but actually just in general. It's important to have courage because in our spiritual practice, we're going to face reality as it is in its completeness. And that means facing all kinds of things which we don't want to see. It means facing our own subconscious mind, which is possibly the most horrifying thing you can imagine. But by facing it, we can understand it and we can overcome it. But that takes a certain amount of courage. So cultivating the willingness to face what we don't want to face. The willingness to confront what scares us. The willingness to confront what we find unpleasant. And in this way, our spiritual practice will make much swifter progress. In the next section, Brahman, it occurred to me when contemplatives or Brahmins who long for acquisition, respect, and fame go to dwell in remote wilderness or forest areas because of that flaw, longing for acquisition, respect, and fame, those honorable contemplatives and Brahmins bring upon themselves unwholesome fear and terror. But when I go to dwell in remote wilderness or forest areas, I do not long for acquisition, respect, and fame. I have few wishes. Of the noble ones who have few wishes when they go to dwell in remote wilderness or forest areas, I am one of them. Brahman, seeing that I have few wishes, I became more confident about living in the wilderness. So this is another one. So longing for acquisition, respect, and fame. So these are three things which are a real trap for us. Even people who think, oh, I'm not really interested in wealth and fame and getting respect and so on. Even people who say that and think that even, when they come upon it, when they suddenly have access to lots of really nice things, when people are bowing down at them all the time, when they start to get a certain amount of respect, renown and fame, good reputation that's spreading far and wide, then so easily they fall into arrogance. They fall into self-importance. They fall into attachment and obsession with what they've got, with their wealth, their respect, their fame. And wealth here doesn't necessarily mean owning lots of things, but rather the ability to get what you want. So there's not actually a huge difference between having a mansion full of nice things and knowing that whenever you ask somebody to get you really nice things, they will. So, for example, there's a lot of monks who live in relatively austere dwelling places, but they have wealthy supporters who, at the drop of a hat, would quite willingly give them anything they ask for. So that still creates the opening for one to become obsessed with acquisition. Because maybe right now you don't have a gold-plated Rolls Royce, but you know that if you asked for one, you would get it. So it's not so much different, is it? It's still right there within reach of the mind. But that's fairly extreme. There's another really lovely sutta where the Buddha is talking about wealth, and he says that he gives two examples. He gives the example of someone who is very wealthy, has like a really huge mansion with all kinds of nice furniture and a really wonderful, loving spouse and all kinds of really nice possessions and well-respected in the community. But that person has no attachment or obsession to it, and they decide to become a monastic, and they renounce all of it and leave it behind and go off and become a monastic. So for that person, all of that great wealth and wonderful companions and all that is not an obstacle for them. It's not a fetter. But then he gives the example of somebody else, and he says, this is someone who's got a tiny, dirty, poorly built hut, and he's got a chipped old water pitcher that's not very good. He's got an obnoxious, irritating spouse who's always harassing him. But he's so attached to these things that he can't leave them behind. He's so attached to them that he can't give them up. So for him, or for that person, even though the acquisitions are actually quite meager, quite low quality, quite cheap, because of that person's attachment, they bind them even more tightly than the riches and wealth of the first person, the person who could give up all that wealth and pursue a spiritual life. So longing for acquisition doesn't just mean longing for gold-plated Mercedes. I've never actually seen a gold-plated car of any sort, by the way. I don't know why I keep using that as an example. But actually, it has to do with the way we latch onto acquiring anything, the way we latch onto any kind of possession. So this can even be something so simple as being attached to your robes, being attached to your bowl, having a craving for a nice bed sheet. It can be anything, no matter how simple and meager. If the mind has strong craving and attachment, then that's a fetter for us, and that can be a serious obstacle. And longing for respect and fame. These are, again, really dangerous things because people will go to incredible lengths to get respect and fame. They'll do the most mind-blowingly obscene, bizarre, unwholesome things in order to get respect and fame. But respect and fame are not inherently good things. In fact, respect and fame, when contacting an unenlightened person, often tends to fuel conceit and arrogance, can fuel a sense of superiority, a sense of self-importance. So we need to be extremely careful about these things. And if we do notice that we're starting to acquire a certain amount of respect and fame, then we need to be really careful to maintain our humility. Be very, very careful to recognize that respect and fame are not inherently good things. In fact, they're quite hazardous if we're not careful. But also recognizing that there can be some benefit to them, and that they, for example, as a Dharma teacher, if one is well known, then one has a broader reach. One is able to bring benefit into a larger number of people's lives. So if one is constantly reminding oneself that this is simply a way of being of more benefit to the world, well, that's fine, as long as one is careful not to fall into the trap of self-importance. By the way, there's actually a whole section of the Samyutta Nikaya on this, longing for acquisition, respect, and fame, where the Buddha talks about how terrible and awful and dreadful these things are. Ayasoma was smiling and giving the thumbs up because she really likes that Samyutta. Then it says, Brahman, it occurred to me when contemplatives or Brahmins who are lazy and lethargic go to dwell in remote wilderness or forest areas. Because of that flaw, laziness and lethargy, those honorable contemplatives and Brahmins bring upon themselves unwholesome fear and terror. But when I go to dwell in remote wilderness or forest areas, I am not lazy and lethargic, I am energetic. Of the noble ones who are energetic when they go to dwell in remote wilderness or forest areas, I am one of them. So this is particularly referring to being energetic in the training of our mind. So applying the mind resolutely to identifying unwholesome mind states the moment they appear and immediately relinquishing them, and actively trying to cultivate and develop wholesome qualities of mind. So that's the most important aspect of energy, which in this section, energy is virya, which is almost synonymous with the word vayama. So in sama vayama, right effort. Virya also is energetically applying oneself to one's meditation practice. So not being slack or lazy in one's meditation practice. So this is a major problem which often comes up. I mentioned this yesterday, especially with using objectless meditation. It's very easy to fall into this dull, hazy, slack state of mind, which feels peaceful to a certain degree, but it's not clear, it's not alert. So there's a certain amount of tranquility, but there's no energy, there's no wisdom, there's not much awareness, so it's not very useful, it's not of much benefit. It's kind of like taking a nap. It's not the worst thing you can do. If you're really tired, actually taking a nap can be a good thing. If you really need a bit more rest, it's okay. But especially during our meditation practice, we're not trying to nap. We're trying to have an alert, energetic mind. So then we should have this clear distinction. There's the time when we're sleeping, and during that time, you let the mind rest and sleep. But the rest of the time, we should be trying to keep the mind as sharp and alert and clearly aware as possible. So that's also the cultivation of energy. So this is what the Buddha is talking about here when he talks about laziness and lethargy versus the cultivation of energy. Then the Buddha says, Brahman, it occurred to me when contemplatives or Brahmins who have hazy mindfulness and a lack of clear awareness go to dwell in remote wilderness or forest areas. Because of that flaw, hazy mindfulness and a lack of clear awareness, those honorable contemplatives and Brahmins bring upon themselves unwholesome fear and terror. But when I go to dwell in remote wilderness or forest areas, I do not have hazy mindfulness and a lack of clear awareness. I have mindfulness established. Of the noble ones who have mindfulness established when they go to dwell in remote wilderness or forest areas, I am one of them. Brahman, saying that I have mindfulness established, I became more confident about living in the wilderness. So here again, we see a classic element of Buddhist practice, which these days has been overemphasized to the exclusion of everything else in Buddhism, which is mindfulness, sati. But notice here that mindfulness comes together with sampajana or sampajanya, which means clear awareness. Sometimes that's translated other ways, situational awareness, broad understanding. What are some of the other translations I've seen? Contextual awareness. Sampajanya, it comes from the prefix sang, which means complete or together, and pajana, which means understanding or knowing. So sampajana has this sense of completely, thoroughly, all around understanding or knowing a situation. So mindfulness comes together with sampajanya, so this all-around awareness. So this is also sometimes spoken about as being like mindfulness is being clearly aware of whatever you're pointing the mind at. Sampajanya is being aware of everything else in the periphery of your awareness. So sampajanya is sometimes translated as peripheral awareness. So giving a sense of that we have this broad, open awareness, even as we're being particularly mindful of one particular part of it, we still have this broad awareness of everything else that we're currently experiencing. Next one, Brahman, it occurred to me when contemplatives or Brahmins have an unconcentrated and scattered mind, go to dwell in remote wilderness or forest areas because of that flaw, an unconcentrated and scattered mind. Those honorable contemplatives and Brahmins bring upon themselves unwholesome fear and terror. But when I go to dwell in remote wilderness or forest areas, I do not have an unconcentrated and scattered mind. I have concentration. Of the noble ones who have concentration when they go to dwell in remote wilderness or forest areas, I am one of them. Brahman, saying that I have concentration, I became more confident about living in the wilderness. So concentration here is the word samadhi. So samadhi, as I've mentioned many times, comes from three parts. The prefix sang, which means together or whole, as I mentioned earlier. And a, which means towards or intensely. And di, which means to hold or to gather, to collect. So samadhi means gathering the mind together, holding the mind together, unifying the mind. So samadhi is mental unification. So some translators don't like the word concentration because it can imply a narrowing of attention, whereas samadhi does not require narrowing of attention. You can have a broad field of awareness and still have samadhi. So samadhi is when the mind is steady, still, and unified. It's not scattered or distracted or dispersed. It's very steady, still, clear, and unified. So when one does not have a unified, still mind, when one's mind is scattered and dispersed, then it's much easier to fall into fear. It's much easier to get lost in fear. Then the final part of this section, the Buddha says, Brahman, it occurred to me when contemplatives or Brahmins who are foolish and stupid go to dwell in remote wilderness or forest areas because of that flaw, foolishness and stupidity, those honorable contemplatives and Brahmins bring upon themselves unwholesome fear and terror. But when I go to dwell in remote wilderness or forest areas, I do not have foolishness and stupidity. I have wisdom. Of the noble ones who have wisdom when they go to dwell in remote wilderness or forest areas, I am one of them. Brahman, saying that I have wisdom, I became more confident about living in the wilderness. So first off, I should just point out the word which is translated here as stupid. These days I'm translating as obtuse. The Pali word is elamuga, which doesn't have anything to do with your IQ. Elamuga actually more literally means blind and deaf. And again, not in the sense of someone with a physical disability, but rather in the sense of someone who's oblivious. So oblivious would also be a great translation of this word. Someone who's oblivious to what's going on. So someone who is foolish and oblivious, or foolish and obtuse. So this quality of obtuse or oblivious also indicates a certain amount of willfulness certain amount of like, I don't know and I don't care. This kind of willful ignorance or willful foolishness. So here the Buddha doesn't actually define wisdom at all. And since this is prior to his awakening, it's unclear what exactly he meant by wisdom at that time. But still, it does emphasize that point that one needs to have a certain amount of wisdom as one embarks upon one's spiritual practice. A certain amount of discernment, at a bare minimum, an ability to discern wholesome from unwholesome. At a bare minimum, the ability to recognize good and bad. That's kind of the basic foundational level of wisdom. And then further is the wisdom of knowing what is and is not the path. And that's where it starts to get a little more complicated. So knowing what leads towards awakening and what does not lead towards awakening. So then the Buddha moves on to a description of some of the practices that he engaged in. So he says, Brahman, it occurred to me, perhaps on the standard auspicious days, the 14th, 15th, and 8th days of the fortnight. So those are the Uposatha days and also the days in between the Uposatha. So traditionally, these were the lunar quarters. So the full moon, half moon, and new moon days. So to this day in Buddhist cultures, it's still common for people to go to the monastery on the lunar quarters, or to, if they don't go to the monastery, they make a commitment to increase their spiritual practice for a day, maybe taking some extra precepts or doing more Dharma study or doing more meditation practice. So even before the advent of Buddhism, many of the religious and contemplative traditions in ancient India had some kind of practice of doing extra religious or spiritual activities on the lunar quarters. The idea was at least once a week. Once a week or once every 2 weeks, you would make an extra effort in your practice. So he says, perhaps on the standard auspicious days, the 14th, 15th, and 8th days of the fortnight, I will go to live in dwellings that are terrifying and apprehension-inducing, such as forest cairns, jungle cairns, and tree cairns. Maybe I will experience fear and terror. Brahman, on a later occasion during the standard auspicious days, the 14th, 15th, and 8th days of the fortnight, I went to live in dwellings that are terrifying and apprehension-inducing, such as forest cairns, jungle cairns, and tree cairns. Brahman, while I was living there, a deer would come, or a peacock would knock down a stick, or the wind would make the leaves rustle. Brahman, it would occur to me, perhaps this is the fear and terror coming. Brahman, it occurred to me, setting that aside, why do I dwell in expectation of fear? Perhaps in whatever way fear and terror come to me, and that way I will remove the fear and terror. Brahman, if fear and terror came while I was walking, I would not stand or sit or recline until I removed that fear and terror while walking. Brahman, if fear and terror came while I was standing, I would not walk or sit or recline until I removed that fear and terror while standing. Brahman, if fear and terror came while I was sitting, I would not recline or stand or walk until I removed that fear and terror while sitting. Brahman, if fear and terror came while I was reclining, I would not sit or stand or walk until I removed that fear and terror while reclining. So here he's talking about a practice of whenever fear arises in the mind, we look at it and not trying to escape it. And he gives this example of these 4 meditation postures. So walking, standing, sitting, and reclining. And so he said, like if he was doing walking meditation and fear arose, then he would keep doing walking meditation so that he could focus all his attention just on processing and focusing and working through the fear, understanding the fear. So not changing his posture or changing his activity, because then that might distract him from what's actually going on, which is this irrational arising of fear, this unnecessary arising of fear. So just continuing the walking meditation while focusing all his mind on understanding and overcoming the fear. Same if he's doing standing or sitting or reclining, whatever posture he's in, just to hold in that posture without changing it, and just focus all his attention on identifying and overcoming the fear. And this also applies to any other kind of unwholesome state of mind, so including working with physical pain, for example. Instead of changing your posture to try to avoid what's going on, stay with the posture and focus on the experience until it's fully understood with equanimity. Then if you want, you can change your posture. But if as soon as the body starts to hurt, you immediately change your posture, then what you're actually doing is you're training yourself in restlessness and aversion rather than in serenity and equanimity. So the moment you're like, oh, my knees hurt, oh, gotta change my posture. Oh, my back hurts. Oh, I'm gonna get up and do walking meditation. No, well, then you never actually learn how to deal with these things. You just keep training your mind to hate those sensations. You keep training your mind to avoid those sensations. You keep training your mind to ignore your actual experience. So rather than developing wisdom and serenity, you're just developing more greed, hatred, and delusion. So doing this practice of staying in the posture until you overcome the unwholesome mind state, and then if you want to change your posture, you can. And yeah, this does mean that you might wind up doing 3 hours of walking meditation or 3 hours of sitting meditation or something, and that's fine. You can learn a lot that way. Then the Buddha says, Brahmin, there are some contemplatives and Brahmins who perceive the night as exactly the same as the day, and the day as exactly the same as the night. Here I say that those contemplatives and Brahmins are dwelling in confusion. However, Brahmin, I perceive the night as exactly the same as the night, and the day as exactly the same as the day. Brahmin, if one might rightly speak of a person as a being who is characteristically unconfused, has arisen in the world for the welfare and happiness of many people, out of compassion for the world, for the benefit and welfare of celestial and human beings, it would be rightly speaking of me as a being who is characteristically unconfused, who has arisen in the world for the welfare and happiness of many people, out of compassion for the world, for the benefit and welfare of celestial and human beings. So first off, the Buddha is speaking about seeing things as they are. So not trying to pretend that something is different than what it is, but seeing things exactly as they are. And then he emphasizes that the manifesting of an awakened being is something that comes from compassion. So this is a really important point, which often gets overlooked, which is how often in the suttas the Buddha emphasizes compassion as being both the motive for awakening and the result of awakening. So compassion runs all through Buddhist practice, in every school of Buddhism. So compassion is a critical motivating factor, a critical state to be developed, and a necessary result of the cultivation of wisdom. Then the Buddha goes on and describes a little bit about his experiences. And this is talking, by the way, on the night of his awakening, just to give you a little heads up. Brahman, in me, unrelenting energy was initiated, clear mindfulness was established, my body was tranquil and unagitated, my mind was concentrated and focused. Brahman, isolated from sensuality and from unwholesome phenomena, I attained and remained in the first jhana, which has thought, examination, and the rapture and happiness produced by isolation. With the pacification of thought and examination, and with internal composure and mental unification, I attained and remained in the second jhana, which has no thought, no examination, and has the rapture and happiness produced by concentration. With the dissipation of rapture, I dwelt equanimous, mindful, and clearly aware. what the noble ones describe as equanimous, mindful, and happy. I attained and remained in the third jhana. With the abandoning of pleasure and pain, and with the previous disappearance of elation and depression, I attained and remained in the fourth jhana, which has neither pain nor pleasure and has purity of mindfulness and equanimity. So that's the four jhanas, and I spoke about that in some detail recently when I spoke about the Anupada Sutta. So if you're curious about the jhanas, you can look up that discourse on the Anupada Sutta. I speak about it in some detail there. Buddha continues, when my mind was concentrated in this way, completely pure, completely clean, flawless, free of defilements, flexible, workable, stable, and imperturbable, I directed my mind to the recollection of past lives. I remember numerous past lives, 1 life, 2 lives, 3 lives, 100 lives, 100,000 lives, many eons of universal expansion, many eons of universal contraction, many eons of universal expansion and contraction. At that place, I had this name, this family, this appearance, this food, this experience of pleasure and pain, this death. Falling from there, I appeared over there, where I had that name, that family, that appearance, that food, that experience of pleasure and pain, that death. Falling from there, I appeared here. In this way, I remember numerous past lives and their characteristics in detail. Brahman, this was the knowledge that was attained by me in the first part of the night. Ignorance was destroyed and knowledge arose. Darkness was destroyed and light arose, as it is for one who is vigilant, persistent, and determined. So the night that the Buddha attained awakening, the first part of the night, with his mind firmly established in the four jhanas, then he directed his attention towards remembering his past lives. And he found that he could remember many, many, many eons of past lives. So an eon is the lifespan of a universe, which, I don't know what astronomers are predicting these days, but we're talking, let's say, 100 to 500 billion years. So really, really long time. So it's one eon. And he could remember many, many, many eons of lives. And elsewhere in the suttas, he clarifies that he could remember having been every single kind of being except for an awakened being. So he had lived in every single one of the states of existence possible. From the lowest hells to the highest heavens, he'd experienced all of them, except for the experiences of awakened beings. That was the only part of samsara that he had never experienced. And he states he could remember his past lives in detail. So it's not this kind of vague general feeling of like, I think I used to be Cleopatra. But it's this incredible detail of like, I was a railroad worker in the southern United States in 1935, and I was eating beans. Like he could remember the details of countless eons of lives. I, Soma, found that one very amusing. Then the second part of the night, the Buddha says, when my mind was concentrated in this way, completely pure, completely clean, flawless, free of defilements, flexible, workable, stable, and imperturbable, I directed my mind to the knowledge of birth and death. With divine vision, which is pure and surpasses human vision, I see beings falling and appearing. It means dying and being reborn. Inferior and superior, beautiful and ugly, in good places and bad places. I understand how beings fare according to their actions. That's karma. Actions the word is karma. These honorable beings engaged in physical, verbal, and mental misconduct. They disparaged noble beings, they held wrong view, and they based their actions on wrong view. When they were separated from their bodies after death, they appeared in deprivation, a bad destination, in downfall, in hell. However, these honorable beings engaged in good physical, verbal, and mental conduct. They did not disparage noble beings, they held right view, and they based their actions on right view. When they were separated from their bodies after death, they appeared in a good destination, a heavenly world. In this way, with divine vision, which is pure and surpasses human vision, I see beings falling and appearing, inferior and superior, beautiful and ugly, in good places and bad places. I understand how beings fare according to their actions. Brahman, this was the knowledge that was attained by me in the middle part of the night. Ignorance was destroyed and knowledge arose. Darkness was destroyed and light arose, as it is for one who is vigilant, persistent, and determined. So here the Buddha is describing his direct understanding of karma in rebirth. So in the first part of the night, he recollected his own past lives. So recognizing he could remember the causal sequence leading through many, many lives up to his current life. The second part of the night, he directed his mind to understanding karma, to understanding rebirth. So he could see how the choices we make create consequences, and how the choices that we make over the course of many lives determine what kinds of conditions we're reborn in, determine what experiences we have, determine what our conditions are like in the various states of existence. So the first part of the night, he was particularly aware of his own past lives, but the second part of the night, he's seeing how karma and rebirth operates for everyone, seeing that it's universal. It applies to all beings. So it's also recognizing that him, with his many past lives, was not different from anybody else. Everybody goes through countless lives, wandering through samsara and making good choices and bad choices and getting pleasant results and unpleasant results. Then the third part of the night, he says, when my mind was concentrated in this way, completely pure, completely clean, flawless, free of defilements, flexible, workable, stable, and imperturbable, I directed my mind to the knowledge of the elimination of the corruptions. I directly knew as it really is, this is suffering. This is the origin of suffering. This is the cessation of suffering. This is the path of practice which leads to the cessation of suffering. So that's the Four Noble Truths. These are the corruptions. This is the origin of the corruptions. This is the cessation of the corruptions. This is the path of practice which leads to the cessation of the corruptions. So this is interesting because this is the same formula as the Four Noble Truths, except instead of dukkha, the Buddha is using the word asava, which is corruption or defilement of mind, taint of mind. So here he's drawing a direct equation between mental corruptions and dukkha. So defilements are dukkha, dukkha is defilements. He's drawing a direct equation here. Knowing and seeing in this way, the Buddha continues, my mind was freed from the corruption of sensuality, the corruption of existence, and the corruption of ignorance. For more information, see the Sabbasava Sutta, the sutta about getting rid of these corruptions. So we just spoke about it a few days ago, so you can review that discourse if you wish. With liberation, there was the knowledge, liberated. Well, I directly knew birth is eliminated, the spiritual life has been completed, what had to be done has been done, there will not be another life here. Brahman, this was the knowledge that was attained by me in the third part of the night. Ignorance was destroyed and knowledge arose, darkness was destroyed and light arose, as it is for one who is vigilant, persistent, and determined. So in other words, this was his attaining of full awakening, was this direct understanding of the Four Noble Truths, direct understanding of what the defilements of mind are, how they arise, how they come to an end, and what we can do to bring our defilements to an end. So once again, the Four Noble Truths are not children's stuff. They're not basics. They are the highest realization that the Buddha had. They're the deepest and most profound aspect of the Buddha's teachings. So the Four Noble Truths are something we should be constantly coming back to. And if you think you understand the Four Noble Truths and you're not fully enlightened, then that means you don't understand the Four Noble Truths yet. It means your understanding is incomplete. Because if your understanding was complete, then you would be awakened by now. So here again, we see this progression. So the first part of the night, he recollects his own past lives, so his awareness of rebirth. Second part of the night, he investigates the process of karma in rebirth and sees that it's universal. Everyone's going through the same process of karma in rebirth. The third part of the night, he's recognizing, since karma is how we shape our experiences, can we shape our karma in a way that leads to the elimination of our defilements and our dukkha and to the arising of direct knowledge, to understanding? And he realized, yes, there is a way. And he also realized that it was something that he could do right in that moment. Right in that moment, he could break through his defilements and see reality as it is, with a pure and untainted mind. So this was his attainment of awakening, this direct seeing of moral causality and the Four Noble Truths. Then the Buddha says, Brahman, you may think, apparently even today the contemplative Gautama is still not free of lust, hatred, and delusion, which is why he goes to dwell in remote wilderness or forest areas. Brahman, this is not the way to see it. Brahman, seeing two benefits, I go to dwell in remote wilderness or forest areas. I see it as a pleasant way of life for myself here and now, and I have compassion for the next generation. In other words, the Buddha is saying, like, some people may think that I still go to the forest to practice because they think I'm not enlightened yet. But he says that's not the case. It's not the case. He says, one, I live in the forest because it's nice, pleasant, and two, because it makes a good example for others. So he says, I have compassion for the next generation. In other words, he's making a good example, showing others that this is a good way to live a spiritual life. It's a good way to engage in the path of awakening. And there's a number of other suttas along similar lines, which speak about how even after attaining awakening, an awakened being continues to uphold all the principles of sila, samadhi, and panya, all the principles of training, even though they technically don't need to anymore, because they've already completed the path. They still uphold all of the outer manifestations of practice because it's a good example for other people. It shows others the proper way to live a spiritual life, a beneficial way to live a spiritual life. So then the Brahmin says, indeed, Sir Gautama has compassion for the next generation, as it is for an arhat, a rightly self-awakened one. Wonderful Sir Gautama, wonderful Sir Gautama. Sir Gautama, just as one might set upright what has been overturned, or reveal what has been concealed, or explain the path to one who is confused, or bring an oil lamp into the darkness so those with eyes can see. In the same way, Sir Gautama has revealed the Dhamma in many ways. I go for refuge to Sir Gautama and to the Dhamma and to the monastic community. May Sir Gautama remember me as a disciple who has taken refuge for the rest of his life. So happy ending, the Brahmajata becomes a Buddhist. Okay, so that's the end of the sutta. So
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
So anyone who has questions, please type them in the live chat and we'll address your questions.
Thank you so much, Bhante. That was a great explanation. And we have a few other friends who have since joined us. Hello, Ramon, Yanni, Maria, Boone, Victoria, Ella, Laura. Hello, Amy, Michelle, Sally. Andre, good to see you. And Demi, livestream enter, has a very amusing quote from this morning. Quote, I was eating beans, the Buddha.
Fake Buddha quote. God, now we're gonna see this on Facebook. Like someone will post a meme with a picture of the Buddha saying, "I was eating beans." The Buddha. As if there weren't enough fake Buddha quote memes already.
Oh, good morning, Ayas Dhamma. Good to see you online.
Hello, Venerable.
And hello, Jessica and Jan. All right, so there are any questions? Also here from the resident. Willingly foolish?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
How to stop?
Well, form the intention to be wise. So our resident says she likes the phrase willingly foolish and asks how to stop. So form the intention to be wise. So form the solid determination to always be alert and aware, especially of your own mind, and to recognize what's foolish, to recognize what's delusional, to recognize when you're giving in to your defilements or when you're focusing on things in the wrong way, like focusing on things as permanent or pleasurable or as self-identity. And bring attention to that. Bring attention to when you're cultivating delusion, when you're cultivating misunderstanding, or when you're cultivating defilements. And try to stop yourself. Instead, replace that with wholesome perceptions, wholesome activities of mind. So practicing anicca sanya, practicing dukkha sanya, anatta sanya, and cultivating wholesome mind states like mindfulness, equanimity, loving kindness, compassion. Practicing the 10 recollections, recollection of the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, of your own goodness, of your own generosity, recollection of the devas, and the other recollections, which I'm always forgetting. So practice in this way, and then that willful foolishness will start to fade away. Okay. Okay, any other questions?
And Sally is asking online, I directed my mind to the recollection of past lives. She's quoting the Sutta. That place I have this name, this family. Falling from there, I appeared over there, have that name, that family. May I ask, Bhante, is parenthesis, paticca samuppada, close parenthesis, recollection of past lives is required for attaining stream enter?
So as far as I know, no. You don't need to be able to recollect past lives in order to be a stream enter. In fact, there's some reason to believe that even an arhat doesn't necessarily recollect their past lives. That they can develop that ability fairly easily if they want to. But they don't necessarily have that ability. So even recollection of one's past lives is not necessarily a requirement to become an arhat. There's some debate around that point, but there is some evidence in one particular sutta pointing at that. Though it's a sutta which is hotly contested and which is quite different in the Pali version as in the Chinese canon. So there's some debate among scholars as to how accurate that information is. But definitely for stream entry, it doesn't appear necessary to remember one's past lives. Okay. And what was that about dependent origination?
I'm not quite sure.
Okay.
Sally, you can add some information on why you mentioned paticca samuppada. And she's also asking if we can study the suttas in the Samyutta Nikaya regarding acquisition, respect, and fame. Yes, we can. I love them.
I'll make a note of that.
They're very amusing. And Mehmet is asking, thank you, Bhante, why are loving kindness and compassion not factors of enlightenment?
You mean the 7 factors of enlightenment? Why are they not in that list? Well, the Buddha can't cram every item into every list, or else there wouldn't be the 5 powers and the 7 factors of enlightenment and the 4 paths to success. There would just be the 300 of this and the 300 of that and the 300 of the other thing, and then that would just be impossible to remember. It's hard enough just remembering like all the lists of 4s and 5s and 6s and 8s and 10s. Instead, if you just had to memorize it as an entire list of like 500 things, that would be pretty impractical. Where we do see it, though, is, as Bhante Ji points out, it's in the Noble Eightfold Path. So the second aspect of the Noble Eightfold Path, Samma Sankappa, includes non-aversion, which is loving kindness, and non-cruelty, which is compassion. So loving kindness and compassion are implicit in the Noble Eightfold Path. That's one place where you find it listed. But actually, the Buddha, he lists it all over the suttas in countless places, in countless ways. So I think we can safely accept that loving kindness and compassion are important parts of Buddhist practice.
Thank you. Sally's also asking, if not, how could someone see Four Noble Truths as described later on?
So the Buddha did, in fact, see dependent origination on the night of his awakening. It's not mentioned in this sutta, but it's mentioned in other suttas where the Buddha speaks about his realization. He mentions that he directly saw dependent origination. So that would fit under the second knowledge, the knowledge of karma and rebirth, when he was seeing the universal principle of how all beings are going about according to their karma. So that's where the Buddha's realization of paticca samuppada would have happened.
And Boon is saying, if we understand Four Noble Truths but not awaken, can it mean just Chintamaya Panya?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, and that was the last question. Apparently, oh no, so Dhamma is asking. Is there a concise schedule listing your live teachings? I tend to stumble upon them after they've already begun. Yes, actually, on BuddhistInsights.com/events, there's all the listings, but actually we've also made it so that on YouTube.com/BuddhistInsights, so on the page of the channel, there are the upcoming live streams are visualized. So there's also then there's a Google Calendar here on this list that one can upload on their own calendar. And then on the website, I'm going to put the link right now. It's .com/events. But fundamentally, we're meeting every morning at 8 a.m. and every evening at 7:30 p.m. New York time.
Yeah, and so tomorrow we'll have the same usual thing of 8 a.m. Sutta study, 7:30 meditation and Dhamma talk. But then starting Wednesday, we'll be doing a 7-day meditation retreat. So Wednesday morning, I'll give some instructions on that. So we'll still have the 8 a.m. and 7:30 p.m., but rather than Sutta study, it will be directly related to the retreat program. So 8 a.m., my current thought is 8 a.m. I'll give meditation instructions and Dharma encouragement. And then the evening will be particularly for asking questions about how your meditation has been going during the day. So the idea is that you plug in for the morning instructions, then you practice on your own all day, and then in the evening you come back in to discuss how things are going for you and get some pointers on what to do next. Okay.
But there will probably be also some pop-ups happening during the week-long retreat, but we'll take it from there when we start. And Mehmet says, so one would expect that someone cannot awaken without perfecting compassion and then would be a compassionate person in all instances?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And Sally's saying, sorry, I was trying to ask, if not recollected the past lives, how could someone see Four Noble Truths that described later on in the sutta?
Yeah, so again, it's been a subject of debate for hundreds, if not thousands of years. But one way I could see is that even if one doesn't remember in detail one's own personal past lives, one can still have a clear understanding of how the Four Noble Truths operate moment by moment. Because it's kind of like, I don't need to go to South America and see how people live in South America in order to understand that they're experiencing dukkha the same way that I'm experiencing dukkha. So I can recognize they also are human beings like me. Their conditions may be slightly different from me, but they're still going through the same process of ignorance producing dukkha, and eliminating their ignorance and defilements leads to the elimination of dukkha. So you can see the principles in your own direct experience right here and now, and extrapolate that those principles apply in all times and all places to all people, without needing to specifically investigate other times and places. So that's why I personally don't have any problem with the idea that one can completely understand the Four Noble Truths and become an arhat without directing attention to recollecting one's past lives. Because it's not necessary in order to understand the principles of the Four Noble Truths. Okay?
And Sally's also asking, does that mean just realizing the Four Noble Truths of this life is enough for enlightenment? I think you've addressed that already. And she's also adding, I feel shame that I always change posture when I feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, well, just recognize that just means that you need to work on your practice. Just next time that you want to change your posture, wait a few seconds longer than you normally would. So hold the posture until you're like, I want to move, and wait maybe another 5 seconds, and then move. If you do this, then over a period of time, eventually you'll be able to stay longer and longer and longer. So just always pushing yourself a little bit past your comfort zone. And then over time, your comfort zone will grow. Okay?
All right, and I think that's all for today. Thank you so much, Bhante, for teaching. So we will be going through another sutta tomorrow morning, which will be the one that is in fact actually written on the on the schedule, and the one that was scheduled for today that is going to be postponed to a couple of days from now.
Well, it's going to be postponed until after the retreat.
Till after the retreat, yeah, exactly. All right. Well, thank you so much again for teaching us, Bhante. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And thank you all for joining us morning and evening to practice Dhamma and learn the teachings of the Buddha. This is always so lovely. And all right. Have a great